Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Schoolwise Research with James Gitch. I am James Gitch, and today I'm joined with Martin Bennett, who is our head of quality assurance and academic outcomes. So today's subject, Martin, we're talking about the academic side of what we get from schools and how we disseminate it to teachers. So how do we find out what it is they need to learn and what they don't need to be covering again?
Excellent, great question, James, and hello to everybody. This is really about working in partnerships with the schools. It's a two-way relationship. I think that's very important. And so as part of that process from an academic perspective, it's about getting data that they will be naturally collecting anyway. We need to know where students are at the moment, where they're planning to get to in an ideal world, of course. And so schools will have a lot of mechanisms in place. They'll have their own internal systems, which we can use. And of course, there will be the generic systems right across the schooling industry, if you like. So things like, as you mentioned, mock exam results, depending on the age groups, we might use SATs and GL scoring and things like that. And so really it's about getting that information from the school in the first instance, obviously having a look at it, see what kind of data they've sent across. That will be used in conjunction with focus areas, of course, that the school has asked us to look at. We will look at, obviously, the scores as well, so where the student is at the moment. And, of course, we will also look at any SEND requirements. So we take all that data together. I spend a lot of my time looking at data. It does vary. So some schools do send us much more than others. So we literally do get some what we call data dumps, which is quite a lot of information. And really, I guess my role at that stage is to pull out what's important, pull out what's going to be relevant, obviously, for the teachers as well, and obviously disseminate that information accordingly. Really, the first step is building that relationship with the school and getting the data across.
Fantastic. So who do we generally get that data from?
So really the best contacts or the best point of contacts is getting the information from the heads of departments, of course, or indeed, obviously, the specific teachers, which in some instances we do. So again, depending on the age, depending on the year group, etc., we might speak to and get information from that particular class teacher, so for English or maths or science, etc., or it might be heads of department if they're looking at big data sets, etc., so analysing obviously the data that they've got. So really we want to get it, we want to get the information from the person in the school that is closest to the individuals that we're going to teach. And if we can get it right down to teacher level for that particular subject, of course, the data is going to be much more current, of course, in the first instance, because they're working with those pupils, obviously, every day, of course.
How do we contextualise what we do and make it relevant to the pupils? Because I think it's very easy for us to set up a YouTube video and you could just watch on how to do something. But the interaction of the teachers, obviously, we need to make what we tell them interesting and engaging. So how would our tutors go about doing that? And what would your role be in sort of overseeing that?
Yeah, great question. And I think that fits into where does Purple Ruler sit and where do we sit in terms of that kind of academic chain, if you like. I think that's important because whilst we do want to see it as a continuation of obviously their academic journey, we don't want to see it as a burden, something that either they're being forced to do or they think they are expected to do. Really, we want them to do it because they understand why they're being there. And so to do that, it's about obviously looking at material. And indeed, from my teaching career, when I used to teach maybe teenagers, for example, one thing I used to do is actually pick up maybe a teenage magazine, for example, to see what, see what teenagers are reading these days. Looking at obviously the top 10 teenage books that are being bought. I know that might be a little bit old-fashioned these days, but is really looking at what is that age group actually reading and enjoying, in the real world. And that's important because you can bring that obviously into lessons, so you can theme lessons accordingly on the back of that. So, and I think that's important because they're learning at the same time, but it's also in a fun, hopefully more fun and engaging way. But it's also real world as well. I think what's very important in all education, and certainly for us, is how does that apply to the real world? Because I think sometimes that's where children could get disillusioned. I remember doing trigonometry, and I remember doing Pythagoras' theorem and working out photosynthesis, and I'm still not sure I've ever used photosynthesis in my day-to-day world, but the importance was obviously put on that. Whereas if I looked at it in terms of obviously how that could be applied in reality to certain trades and interests, then very quickly you could obviously tailor lessons accordingly. So that would be a starting point for us for sure.
Say we've got a group of pupils, and one of those pupils just don't seem to be keeping up at the same level as the other, as their peers. What would we do with that pupil? How would we help that individual?
Yeah, again, another great question. I think I think if we just take a step back from that, again, this relationship and working with the schools is vital. So, having a fresh look at the data when it comes through and having a look at the grouping of the students is definitely something we look at. So, if we think there's a potential anomaly, even at that early stage, that's something we might flag up and communicate with the schools. Again, it's looking at the data, working with the schools, and obviously verifying. What you want in an ideal world is a particular group is obviously people to be at the same level. And so this is again where our teachers come in and obviously our monitoring processes that we have in place. So because sometimes it might actually just be that the student's quite shy or quite quiet, etc. But actually academically, they are there or thereabouts in terms of obviously the rest of their peers, if you like. It could be some other external factor in terms of what might be causing that. Or it might be genuinely that the student needs to be obviously in a different level. Myself and my colleague Ben, obviously on the customer service side of things, to send obviously emails to school just to obviously check things. We have obviously a review meeting generally after 2 or 3 weeks, which is usually a good indicator in terms of where how the lessons are going, how the students are finding it, and so we are able to move students around. So. And this is important for schools. They're not, pupils, they're not fixed in for those 15-hour blocks. If we need to move somebody, and we have done before. So in the past, we've had, for example, EAL or ESL students, so English as a second language students, where, they have found it a little bit more challenging, not because they're not necessarily academically at that same level, but because they're having to process English, that is not their native language. And so in those instances, we have taken them out and we've either put them in with other ESL students or obviously given them one-to-one. So this is all about having flexibility. And I think that's one of our strengths. We are able to react quite quickly. Once you make a decision as a school, it's not fixed. We can, quite easily turn that around. But it's important to not do that, after the first lesson. So see how the first 2 or 3 go and take it from there.
Thank you. I really appreciate, Martin, your time today and your insights into the academic side of behind the scenes at Helpful Ruler. So thank you very much. And as it's Friday, have a wonderful weekend.
Cool. Thanks. Excellent. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Martin.